topic of today is why isn't anyone using your design system, which is a totally legit question, and it's not an easy one from what we learned. We called this, and when I say we, mostly Maria Sole, which was the author of the research, we named it adoption, but no kids are involved. So next slide, please, so we can run out of the cringe. Thank you. I am Giulio. I'm one of the founders of Belka. With me today, we have Maria Sole.
Hi, everyone.
Which works as a product designer and has been employed in this special project of, I would call it discovery, like proper companies do. And she mostly had insights regarding design system, and we ran upon this adoption issue. So she will run the show later on. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. The agenda of today is divided in three initial points where we will introduce the topic. So how design system actually works. We have I wouldn't say a strong opinion, but at least we have an opinion that it might be not as mainstream as you expect it to be. Then how to detect if your design system could be not as adopted as you want it to be. So how to understand a benchmark and compare yourself to the state of the other companies, which is what emerged from our research. So what are the symptoms? Then we will see some ways, some ideas that we found the most interesting from the companies that we interviewed to increase the adoption and ultimately employ your design system and give it a proper job. And the last, I would say, a third, maybe half of the time will be spent with you. I would like to keep it as conversational as we can, even if I know that webinars are a little bit cringe because it's like me talking to my computer in this very moment. So please, let's put the human part all together, mostly by writing. So that would be the Q&A section. If you don't know us, next slide, please. You're connected with Belka, but I assume that if you're here, you probably already check it out a little bit. We work with companies that want to grow faster through their digital product, and we help them with, we're now mind reading on the next slide thing. And we have this company, thanks to design systems, that we see as a way to grow your companies faster and get more information, get more feedback from the market, not just by insight gathering, but modifying your product faster. We work with a bunch of companies. So for people in Italy, you probably know most of those logos. For people outside of Italy, I would say that you probably know just Doctolib and Red Bull, I would say. Maybe Scalape, which is our local unicorn in Italy. And we run a lot of different projects, such as the new app for spiagge.it, which is kind of the Airbnb for going to the beach. Can you be more Italian than that? Or the Factoring Cloud digital product that we help them scale with a design system as well. This is the biggest SaaS in Italy. It has 500,000 monthly active users, and it's quite a thing considering that it's working with Italian bureaucracy. And fancier stuff linked with the AI, such as Indigo, which they work in making the interaction between human and robots even more flawless, employing AI. But enough about us. Let's go to the most interesting part of the webinar. This is a good moment to remind to all of you, even the one that just had the opportunity to connect, that the session is recorded. Slides will be sent at the end of the webinar via Belka's newsletter. If you forgot to subscribe to Belka's newsletter, no worries, it happens all the time, but we're super kind and we will give you again the link at the end if you feel this is stuff that you want to save up for the future. If you don't know our feelings, we totally understand. But enough with the chit chat, I leave the stage to Maria Sole. If you could be kind enough to write something nice to Maria Sole. She is doing a webinar for the very first time in her life, so she might be a little emotional, but every encouragement, I believe, could help her delivering the best message as possible. All right? Okay.
All right. Thank you, Giulio. So a few months ago, we ran a research project where we interviewed 27 digital product teams because we wanted to learn more about the design system stories. And so we wanted to know more about how designers and developers go about creating and maintaining a design system. So it turns out that when we talk about design systems, we tend to focus a lot on the component library and the Figma file containing it. And we do that because that's the most visible and tangible part. So it's the easiest one to talk about. However, design system is actually much more than that visible artifact. And it is in fact made of a lot of practices that are built around the artifact. An example of those practices, we can see a few of them here, is, for example, the method that we use to manage contributions, ways to collect and process feedback, all the rituals that we carry on to allow those feedback to be produced and people to stay up to date with the work we do around the design system. And if we forget about all these practices, and if we forget to take care of this part of the design system, it is very likely that all of our work on Figma will be quite useless, because it will be extremely difficult for people to actually use their component library as intended. Because in fact, if we don't take care about everything that exists around the component library, we don't really set the right context and the right level of collaboration for people to work together. So having said that, I'd say let's talk about adoption. Because the real challenge is changing the way people work, and it can become even harder to do when you think about it too late in the process of creating the design system. So we want to give you a few tips on how to recognize when you're having low adoption on the design system, and then we'll see what we can actually do about it. So the first symptom of low adoption is a misused library. This means that, for example, you might see components getting detached from the component library and even edited to fit the needs of a specific flow. Or else you might see variables that are added to the component library with no clear criteria. So you notice that things start to get a bit chaotic. Another symptom is mismatched components, meaning that components in production don't quite match what's included in the library. And this is a sign that there is no real alignment between design and development when it comes to the component library. Third symptom is the feedback void. So there's no feedback from the team. And this can mean one of two things. Either your design system is absolutely perfect, or I'd say quite more likely nobody is using it. And so you're not getting feedback because people are not looking into what you did. And this is not good. Finally, what we call the design system police, which is something that we notice from our interviews that some teams tend to resort to when things get a bit too messy. So to try and avoid chaos, teams try to centralize all control over the design system, establishing this figure of the design system police. And while this seems like a good solution in the short term, it's actually counterproductive because it can create a bottleneck that prevents the team from actually creating a design system culture and working within it. So if we spot any of these symptoms, what can we do about them? We condensed a bit of the good practices that we collected during our interviews in 4 practical suggestions that can improve adoption. The first one being spread the word. So this means using all means at your disposal, like Slack channels, design reviews, and so on, to make people aware of what's happening. So make your colleagues, your team aware of the work you're doing around the design system, especially if they aren't working directly on it. Because of course, nobody can use something if they don't know it exists. So let them know. Second suggestion, don't wait for a big reveal. So don't spend months working on your private Figma file and waiting for a dramatic unveiling that you do when the design system, the component library is perfect. Because you want to, well, first of all, this perfection will probably never come because the design system is a work in progress always. And then you want to make sure that you're building something people actually need. So you want to get their feedback as soon and as frequently as possible. Which brings me to suggestion number 3, which is involve people. So do whatever you can to encourage feedback and collaboration, which again can mean having dedicated communication channels, recurring meetings, rituals, and so on. For example, something super interesting that came up during the interviews is the fact that some teams invite people to try out components while they're still creating them. So you can do that by creating a playground and releasing a beta version so that you can actually see people using your components, trying them within their designs, and so you can collect actual relevant feedback before releasing the final version of the component. Finally, the last suggestion would be provide support. So don't assume that everyone on the team already knows what to do with the design system and how to work around it, but make sure to provide documentation where you can and all the support that you can give. Also make yourself available to answer questions all the time. So to sum this up in one single takeaway, I would suggest that you consider your design system as your product and your colleagues, your team as its users. And at the end of the day, you're just trying to build something that they will be able and happy to use. So that's the main thing to keep in mind. And with this, I will give the floor back to Giulio.
All right. Thanks, Maria Sole. Let me do a couple of things. All right. So, well, if you have any feedback or questions, feel free now to start running your fingers on the keyboard. We have the Q&A button here that we would love to, and we would love to engage a small discussion with you. But before that, I mean, you can actually start writing. It's not a big deal. We're happy to cue things. But we are also today releasing for the first time our new service, which is called Design System Checkup. It's a service for companies that already have a design system in place and that might have seen some of those issues. If you could go to the next slide, Maria Sole, fantastic. So, for example, trouble getting started, some questions about governance, not completely sure about which tools you should use, adoption issues like we saw today, and some of the questions that might arise from what Maria Sole showed you today, or a general confusion about what's the value of the thing we're doing, or even worse, the business question, like, why are you doing this? Like, what's the value of a design system? So like trying to explain that you need it to work better, but not really sure on how to start putting labels and numbers around that. Well, we did it for quite a lot of different companies in the last years. If you're curious about that, if this rings a bell, you can go to bit.ly/ds-checkup and take a look. This is all in preview. It's the very first time that we're talking about this publicly, except from the subscribers of the newsletter, which might already have seen this service in the early preview. And we're very excited to share with you and help companies that might have a safe pair of hands in restarting their design system. This is also quite common because as Maria Sole found out from the research, which you can find on our website, kind of like the 50% of you that started a design system project might run some of those issues. It's pretty common. It's not super easy to make this alongside of the rest of the things that you have to do to make your company successful. So, right, this was the sponsor for today, like they say on YouTube, but we can start with questions. So, Grazia, hello, Grazia. Thanks for the question. It says, your experiences, have you worked with teams exclusively dedicated to design system or with teams that only had part of the time available to work on the design system? Well, it can be both. We've observed both of them. We tend to work with companies that don't already have an entirely dedicated team devoted to the design system. Here, there are some questions that you can ask yourself if you are wondering, should I have a dedicated team or not? Spoiler, the answer most of the time is no. Not because I don't like dedicated teams. I think they're wonderful and they probably would make life of everyone way more easier. The point is that they make sense on very big organizations. And when I'm talking very big organization, I'm talking like Spotify size of organization. At that size, problems start to begin to have a exponential size, and thus you need people that do just that. But most of the time, mostly when you're starting or in the very first phases of the scale-up phase, or even in the latest stages of the scale-up phases, you probably have to balance the resources of your team between the design system and growing the project that you're working on, the digital product that you're working on. So it's more an art than a science, the capacity allocation, but you need to balance that between, we need to ship features, because otherwise, or remake features, depending on how mature the product is. And we need to have a stable way to work. We have an article about that maybe Serena can share on the chat about the dedicated team thing that is something that we observed, which goes way more deeper than my answer. It depends on where you are working on, depending on the side of the company, yada, yada. I know this is consultancy 101, saying depends a lot of time. The article explicitly say which depends we're talking about. Okay. So, Serena, we have a problem with the link shortening. So if we could share on the chat the actual links as well, please, so people can actually click on things. We didn't know that Bitly was seen as a very bad thing. We thought that Bitly was nice, but well, the more you know, the less you want to know, I would say sometimes. In this case, at least, I don't see big risk with our Bitly, but we can provide the link on Belka material directly. All right, so next question is how to handle issues with users that always create something new instead of reuse existing components. That's pretty common. The first question that I would ask to myself is why they are doing that. We've seen different scenarios for this. One, for example, was, and is quite strong, but still it's something that that you need to take care of. In the meantime, we had the link to the design system checkup, and fantastic. And we're still waiting, I guess, for the dedicated team article. So the issue with people that are detaching components or creating stuff from the ground up might be 2 or 3 different scenarios. First one is you might have been too baroque or too convoluted, or you just didn't include feedback in the creation of the components. I heard this one from different companies. Basically, what happened is that it was the big release that Maria Sole was talking about before. So you put a lot of effort in creating the design system, and then you just do this huge release. So nothing against working hard, and nothing against being ambitious and trying your best in oh, fantastic. We also have the article about the dedicated team. So back to the answer. Nothing wrong about being ambitious, but on the other hand, you need to get the feedback from your team as soon as you can. What they usually say in the industry is that you should shift left as much as you can, meaning that on the right, you have the end of the project and the artifacts and all the stuff that you want to build that is done. It's finished. But if you discovered something at that stage that could have been discovered before, you need to rework all your steps back to the very beginning of the project until you reach to the feedback point that you missed. So this one is one of the things that might go wrong. So you want to shift left to get your information as soon as you can and build with the team, and not just give them the tools and tell them, look, we did this, it's correct, you just need to use it. Because that's something that usually doesn't work. Another thing, going again with what Maria Sole just shared, which I believe might apply to your case, is asking yourself if you're getting feedback from your users, from your end users, which in the end is the internal team. If you're not getting feedback, they might not even know that there is a design system, or they might not even know which components do they have in the design system. And it might be very independent in their way of thinking. They're like, all right, I'm doing things, I'm solving stuff, I'm building stuff, which is very common. Usually, I would say, I don't want to generalize, with some kind of people, both in the design and the developer group, that are maybe very good, very technically gifted. So they feel that just doing stuff by their own is quicker. In that case, probably you have to guide them, include them in the feedback loop, and maybe run some workshop at the beginning to show them how to use them. This is something that we saw in past projects in our Belka's experience, where just sharing the design system on Figma and on Storybook doesn't mean that people will use it. You need to actually tie that to a project. The third thing that I highly suggest is to tie the design system to the shipping of a new part of your project, or a factor of an old part of the project that you want to relaunch. So the components will be part of the project, and not just a design system project, but there is the product live and the product new part, such as a feature or something. And then from there, you add some components which are the components that you need, that you will reuse in the future, but you don't want to work in a laboratory with white coat and the glasses and just do your own thing. And then when you encounter the product, people are not using it, they're doing their own thing. So again, you need to shift left as much as you can in those kind of cases. I hope those answers are enough. Otherwise, feel free to go deeper. The both of the people who asked for things, or asked for questions. Is that something that I can say in English? Maybe not. All right. So this ends the oh, it doesn't. We have a new question. Hello, Alessandro. Is asking, do you have any idea about how to enhance the findability of components? Say I'm consuming a design system, but I don't realize a component is already there unless I rely on informal communication. Alessandro, can you write me in the chat how many components does your design system have, please? If you have that top of mind, because that might be a very specific question, and I'm assuming people know top of their minds how many components do they have on the design system. Very tense silence, waiting for Alessandro's. Thank you. We can all try to support Alessandro research for the very random information a stranger on the internet asked him. Well, we can run both of the scenarios, Alessandro. It's not super important. If it's not something that you have top of mind, we can just go straight to solutions. So I see a couple of scenarios. The first one is that you might have over-engineered the design system. I'm missing a lot of information, so I'm going with different scenarios. So I don't know if this is your case, but that might be. I'm asking how many components, because we saw sometimes libraries with plenty of components, super specific, with a lot of variants, 30 components. So that's not the case. What I was saying, which I think that it might be useful for maybe someone else in the webinar today, is that if you have too many components, it becomes very hard to find stuff. That's, I mean, by design. And that might be an obstacle toward the adoption of the design system. On the other hand, if you don't see that many components, which are, for example, 30, this probably, I don't know if it's a discoverability issue, but it's more of an involvement issue. Like, people don't know what there is inside there. So I suggest running internal workshops to deconstruct maybe features that you already have, or use the design system to design or front-end development, depending on which team you are, because both of the teams are impacted by the design system. And I assume that you are the most involved person in the design system project. You run the workshop with the people and show them which components you have. So I don't recommend having like a decision by committee on the design system. I prefer some kind of leadership. I wouldn't say that you need like the design system police, but I don't either suggest that every decision is taken by the whole committee of people involved by the design system. But and as you probably are already, Alessandro, the kind of like a leader of your design system in your company. But as a leader, your role is not like doing everything, but it's more like giving to everyone the tools to do their best. And what I feel from what you're writing is that they probably don't know the components, because one thing is thinking, I'm sure that we have this where I can find it. And a different scenario is like, I don't know what there is inside there, and I need to look at all the things inside of it to see if we have it. So maybe having some encouragement and some side-by-side working on the artifacts that might really help toward the adoption of your team. If you are super busy and you have someone who is already doing this inside your company, you might ask him or her to do that for you, so you can kind of like spread the things. So yeah, that's how I would say. If that doesn't work as well, you probably have a big accountability issue in the organization, because then at the point people are aware, they know where to find them, you show them, and then they're just decided that they don't want to use it. So it's either accountability or components are so complicated, are so crazy that people prefer to not use them. But I would prefer to know that instead of keep investing on a design system that is not really helping your cause. So, well, I hope that there is no hard proof that you need to learn that way. It's probably just that or no, but that's an option as well that I wanted to share. Thanks, Alessandro. It was a very good question. So we have a couple of other questions. One is very long, which start with a sorry. Don't be sorry, Davide. Long questions have details, so I don't have to ask you to roam and tell me how many components do you have. They're saying, I was previously working in a very big company, kind of Spotify size, but way less into design than them, of course. I mean, why, of course? I mean, what happened is that we had weekly roundtable with all the international teams working on the design system all across the globe. All right, so very big corporate style. As you previously suggested, we tied the release of the new app to the creation of the design system. What happened then is that based on how much the single regional CEO of the company valued the importance of the design system, some team ended up having one, some in another country, not really. Would you say is important to stress the importance of a design system, both economically speaking and strategically speaking, also with the leadership of a company? And would you use different words to explain it to them? So, Davide, this is a wonderful question. Thank you very much. Couple of things. The first one, and this is really like a complete segue into our content, we are releasing an article about how to measure the value of a design system. So if you're curious of the long answer of this, because you like long questions, make sure that you subscribe to the newsletter. I think we have some juicy information for you there. Back to the current situation, I try to answer as extensively as I can. Couple of things here. First, most of the companies don't measure their design system value. And when I say most, I would say like 90% of them. That makes it very hard to translate into business goals. And the consequence is that you said regional CEO, which I believe is both a blessing and a curse sometimes. I respect, obviously, the business people, but they might not be into digital products as we are. So they might see the world in a different, with different lenses, which are business. And they see numbers and Excel spreadsheets, and that's good because someone have to take care of that. But you need to kind of like talk with their language if you want to have them on board, and you need to ask them like, how do you measure success? What are your goals? And yada yada. I mean, and that is translatable to some kind of numerical thing that they are happy to see some kind of progress. The issue that you had in the previous company is that probably regional CEOs have a lot of power into the region that they are, and globally they're trying to kind of like make scale progress towards the whole organization. I would say that letting regional CEOs decide for this is a positive thing, because I don't believe that an authoritarian central state is a good idea anytime. This has been proven by history and not just in the design system history. And this tends to lead to very bad things in the long run. So it might be that some regions had different priorities for the time, and that adopting the design system wasn't their top priority. The problem that I see here is that I don't feel that probably company-wise there was some kind of goal that was tied to the adoption of the design system that was explained to be a way to increase the success of the digital product. Let me explain. For what I see as a design system is a tool to turbocharge the production of interfaces, so you don't have to test like in theory things, you actually change the product. Changing the product, you get feedback from the market, which is the only thing that really counts, because if you ask for people like, would you buy that? They say, yeah, sure, why not? Because they risk nothing. But if you actually try to make them use something and they don't, then you're sure that they are not interested into that. And you can do that, unfortunately, with digital product, just changing the digital product. So you need to change the digital product to know the market. That's mandatory. You don't have a way to change that. So ultimately, that's why in Belka, we believe that digital products with design system means better business. So this is a kind of plot that you can run to the leadership team usually. So they're like, now I understand why you're doing that. Because if you just tell them, look, I will be more cozier working, it's more comfortable, it's more convenient, they're like, cool, but we need to make money. You remember that? So they're like not into that completely, unless you're doing very good margins. And they need to understand what value they will get out of that. So I would say that probably this kind of issue was bigger than you, because company-wise, if you see the perspective of what you're telling me is that you had corporate, then you have regional CEO, which report to the bigger corporate, and there was, I assume, you, unless you were the regional CEO. In that case, congratulations, and I hope that I didn't talk too much shit about you during this explanation, but you can't really interfere too much with that. You can just try to push and remind him, like, or her, like, look, we need to do these kind of things. But there, they were probably reporting some kind of result to the head of the company, and that's something that should hold them accountable. So that's, I mean, that's something that you can influence to some degree. That's the long answer. If you want to know more about how to explicitly measure the value of a design system, check the next article. We will go way deeper than my answer, and I think that we'll find some interesting stuff from what you're looking for. All right, we have probably time for a couple of questions more. Davide Benatti was the regional CEO, obviously. All right, but good for making to business. Sorry for talking bad about spreadsheets. I'm also a friend of Excel. Do we need to stop creating components at a certain numbers? How to keep up with features developments? What the next after components? Wow. All right. So hi, Anga. Thanks for the question. Let's start with the first one. Do we need to stop creating components at a certain numbers? No, you need to have as much components as you need. What I recommend is not, for example, duplicating semantically analogous components. Let me run an example in this, because this makes sense in my mind, but maybe not in yours, because it was very ambiguous. For example, if you have one kind of button and another kind of component that behaves like a button, you are duplicating a semantically similar element into two graphical elements, for example. And that's a very bad idea, because you are creating complexity, and the more the complexity, the more expensive it will be to maintain your design system, to maintain your product, and so on. So you need to make sure that at some point during the life cycle of your design system, you take all the state of the design system and see, and start to check for duplicates, for weird components, and in a more general sense, to keep the thing tidy. I was asking before about how many components do you have, because sometimes the complexity of a big design system with a lot of components can become a problem into the adoption, because it becomes a very complicated object to manipulate, because there is a lot of stuff. So as simple as it might sound, the more stuff there is, the more complicated it is. So you want to keep it as simple as you can, but with all the components you need to have. So it's more an art than a science in that sense. I would say anyway that if you have more than, like, if you are above the hundreds, like in the thousands, I would start to worry for sure. If you are in the hundreds plural, that's quite a lot. You might want to take a look and see if there is stuff that you can maybe start to group into similar components. And that's, I would say, the upper bound. For the lower bound, if you have a couple of components, I don't need to tell you that you probably are missing a lot of stuff. So yeah, usually no one asks that question. So how to keep up with features development? Well, what I would suggest, again, we have stuff about this, is the Serenis, if I don't remember wrongly. Serena, maybe you can link that as well. So it's the link with Serena is talking about including some part of design system into the development of the product. So the point is that if you don't already have a design system, it's like cleaning your house. If you never cleaned your house for a long while, it takes a lot of effort at the beginning, but then if you do it regularly, it's not a big task. So you need to ramp up at the beginning if you don't have that, but then doing smaller cycles of let's just add a little bit or tweak a little bit. Let's just make some small adjustments, include this new weird component that you needed because you're in a very specific industry. So, and how you do that? I don't suggest blocking the whole team to do just design system for a couple of weeks. That's usually a sign of too much focus on an existing design system. I suggest putting a little bit of design system into every sprint, unless you're doing a very, very new, fantastic, thank you, Serena. Unless you're doing a very, very new component, and that might be something that you want to engineer properly with the front end and the design team and adding to the design system that you already have, and really adding a big chunk of a component into a design system. Otherwise, you should be able to put it into the sprints. If that's not possible, there are two possible answers, reasons. One is that your product management / team leader / the people who is deciding how to allocate capacity doesn't like that. It's like, no, we need to ship features. In that case, I would ask myself why he's behaving like that. Because if she's behaving like that because you're like tight on money, resources, or time, you might have to just accept it. And that might be just a dark moment in your company. Otherwise, if it's not at a dark moment, you need to have a proper talk and show her the value of why you want to add this on every sprint. Because you're not saving time just today, you're building up a multiplier on the long term. And you need to put that inside the sprint, every sprint that you do. The other case, if you can't put it in a sprint because it's just too big, you probably have to go back to square one and properly engineer your design system. That might take a lot of time. We did it for a couple of companies. One was, for example, Subito, and we had to rebuild it from the ground up because of technical reasons mainly, and they decided to outsource it because it's a hell of a work, and you probably will need to stop your team, which is something that you might don't want to do because the team is busy doing what the team does, which is working in your specific industry for your specific customers and not on a design system, which is something that is kind of the same discipline, the same practice between different companies. And the third part of that, Anga, is what's next after components? Very good question. It's processes and people. So the biggest lie that we tell ourselves about design system is that the biggest issues are in the artifacts section. When I say artifacts, I mean Figma, I mean Storybook, React, and so on. As a professionals, we all know to handle that. It's our job and we are good at it usually, but we need to put processes and put people in the right place and to have kind of like ceremonies like the agile, I would say, like you don't do software never talking to another human being and never trying to make sense of the things and try to exchange information both in an informal and formal way. That should be the same with your design system. So after components, you need to put the team in an asset that they will be enabled to keep maintaining the design system. That's why we saw most of the failures in the design system practice inside companies, because you just end up delivering the components and you're like, what's next? And you're like, nobody knows. It's like, oh, we have it. It's done, right? It's not. It's a tool on how you work, and you need to keep that up for the next steps. So last question. because otherwise we run out of time if we are not already. Yeah, no worries, Anga. That was wonderful questions. No, we have 8 minutes. We have plenty of time. So probably a couple of questions. So if someone after anonymous attendee want to ask the very last question, aside from Davide Benatti, the regional CEO, no, that's comparsa, sparita. I don't know if that was dismissed or something. All right. Oh no. I might have fiddled with the Zoom interface. Sorry. So the question is, what is your experience with a pattern library, pattern or example library on top of components library? I assume this is a question on something like Tailwind, using Tailwind, and next to it having the how do you say, the custom components for your company. But if you could help me, anonymous attendee, I'm happy to share my consideration, but I don't want to answer to a different question that you asked me. Yeah, thanks, Serena. I found it. Oh, let me see. Oh, right, Christoph, no worries. We can wait for you. We should check for the next webinars if we can like unmute people for these kind of situations. That would be fun. So we can talk. This sounds super impersonal. We're very sorry about looking like robots. You need to write to us. We're like leaving ChatGPT. It's more having the components and everything in place, and then documenting, validation, filtering, etc. on top of it. So you have the component, you have, I assume, both Storybook and Figma and whatever you're working on, or 08 or Sketch, and then documenting, validation, filtering. So like the states of the component, I assume. So like a button when is reacting, for example, to a bad input, or is selected or not. So the states of a component. Well, in this case, there are a couple of things that you do. First one is using Storybook. I'm talking developer side. Storybook is super easy to implement. You can put React code natively on it, and you have the states that you can play with as properties. So you can see all the states, and it's visible by code. So developers usually don't have a hard time understanding that. And that for code. So that's the custom behavior that every field that you find that might be. The other one is design. With design is a little bit trickier, I would say. That's because design is not code mostly. So you don't need to document every behavior, and the Figma file won't be sad about that. The issue is that on the development side, developers will be sad about that because they won't be able to understand how you expect the button or the input or the select or whatever component we're talking about is expected to behave when it's like validated or filtered or in a different state. What's my suggestions? What are my recommendations? Well, include developers as soon as you can, because otherwise you might not have this information earlier on. So you need, again, to shift left as much as you can the feedback from the developers for the designers. Moreover, you need designers that can probably use Figma. I'm saying this probably in a very aggressive way, but that is what it is. We need to be able to use Figma variants and booleans and properties as good as we can to properly document that. What I'm saying is that you don't want to duplicate your component a lot of times and add the variants, but you want to have a single component with the behaviors on your right column mapped as properties and booleans and so on. So you can use the component as it would be code with the actual states. So you need to document that. Moreover, there are some tools, some automatic tools, but we might share that as well in the future, both automatic and human. We would say half automatic, kind of automatic, that can help you into the task of keeping all the states visible. Because another issue with Figma is that you have the component, good. Then you have the component with all the states, better. Then you have the component with all the states into a single component with the variance, Boolean, and so on properly set. Awesome. But then the discoverability is horrible because there is just this right column and you don't see the different behaviors of the component. You have to check them by hand, and you don't have, like in writing, something to guide you. So the best that I saw, but it depends on the side of the company and so on. So I don't recommend this as the best solution for everyone, but a very interesting take that I saw, it was Loom recording of someone telling you how to use it and showing the different states. You can do this by writing as well, which is less expensive, with some plugins and tools. And that's, I recommend working on that. I hope that was what you asked, Christoph, because if it's not, I talk a very long time, but I'm pretty sure that you would have tapped in if it wasn't the case. All right, that ends the questions for today. Thank you very much for everyone who participated. Remember that if you like what you saw, / you want to stay in touch with us, you can just subscribe to our newsletter. You will receive slides and I'm blanking. The slides and the recording of today's webinar. It was very fun to see all of you. I mean, in writing. And if you are interested in this kind of content, if we could go to the next slide. We are doing another webinar very soon about the value of the design system. That was what you already asked. So if we could share also the not.bit.ly link for the future, Selena, so banks are happier. I'm really sorry you have to go through these, people. I didn't know about this issue with Bitly. So yeah, it's what's the value of a design system. We will go through, not with Maria Sole, but with Sarah, which is the other person who did the research with her on the 30 companies that we talked before. We will talk about how to measure the value of a design system, what's the value of a design system, and how to communicate that with the business, which is a kind of a task by itself. I'm looking forward to meet again all of you, and thank you very much. And good job, Maria Sole. That was our first webinar. So if anyone could, oh well, this we can do this. This is super cringe. I love it. All right. Thanks again, and see you on the next webinar or on our newsletter.